We need a scribe. Yes. We need a note taker. Can anybody help with note taking? The
I
first
promise
row
you.
is
I
who?
promise you, it's not a particularly burdensome scribe duty.
Okay, but we'll get to that point. I think we have enough people here to actually help out with taking notes, and then I think we can, you and me can take the question from the chat panel, so to say. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can handle Zulip. We just need a scribe if you haven't gotten one yet.
Well, we'll ask for it soon.
Okay.
So I think let's start, right?
Yeah. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, welcome everyone. This is TSV area IETF116 meeting. And Martin, we are getting some noise from you. So this is Jahidujaman Sharkar, and on the screen, Martin, you're to TSV Eddie. We are also the chair of this area. So Martin, up to you. But before that, I think, again, we need a note taker. Anybody wants to help? Magnus, thanks. Magnus, something that he likes. I know what he likes, so I'll fix it. So then we have, over to you, Martin.
Okay, next slide, please. This is the note well, which you've seen several times this week already, if not before. If you've never seen this before, please read it, or at least follow the links. Next slide. If you have not logged into the Meet Echo Lite device and you're attending here in person, please go ahead and do so, because that also serves as the blue sheet for this and will help us to properly select the right size of room next time. So Meet Echo Lite also enables you to join the queue. It is the only way to join the queue. Next slide. You guys are probably aware of these tools by now, since we're 2 days in. Next slide. Okay, today we're just going to do our customary 10 minutes on the state of the area, and we'll have a short or open mic for any issues you would like to bring to the community and to your area directors. And then our invited talk today is Marcus Eiler, who is one of the chairs of IPPM. One thing we try to do in this area meeting is have some of the lesser known or not, some of the working groups which maybe are not core to what people think of as transport, and introduce and update people in the area about what they're doing. And it's Marcus's turn for IPPM. So I'm really looking forward to that talk. I think it'll be quite informative. Next slide. Okay, in terms of our current situation, across all the working groups and updates, I'm not going to read all these, but I do want to note TSVWG. This actually happened last time in London, but we didn't really fully acknowledge it. That David Black has stepped down as one of the chairs of TSVWG. Gori Fairhurst remains, but Martin Seaman is our new chair. So thank you, welcome to Martin, and thanks to David for everything he's done for many, many years in helping to lead that working group. Mask and Alto are really pretty active in rechartering discussions, and that's pretty much it for my groups. So ahead.
Yeah, so my groups, DTN is actually progressing really good. They have their planned work under the new charter, and they're working on DTN architecture. management architecture, and then IP and schema. And that's already this morning session was like very good discussions. And then NFS before they are actually slow, but this time as they have a full agenda, so you might actually go and check what's happening there. Quick, making good progress, like multipath, and then there are really active activity on the act frequency, and they have also updated the QLog drafts, so something to make yourself aware of. RMCAT, there's the last document in the RFC editor, so the plan is to actually, when this goes to out 48, we're gonna announce closing of that working group. So I'm working with the chairs to actually see how to make that happen. And TAPS, they have all this amazingly nicely written drafts like architecture interface and implemented drafts. They're en route to IETF last call. So soon you can read them, and you should read them actually and comment on the IETF last call. That was it for my working groups.
Not appearing on this slide is the what is now called the congestion control working group. The name Congress was rejected by the IESG, so we're going to try again with a less fun but more descriptive name, CCWG. That charter is currently being rewritten, and we will take it back to the IESG shortly after this meeting. And I am cautiously optimistic that we will be able to have the first meeting of the congestion control working group in San Francisco. Much thanks to Reese and Eric Kinnear for agreeing to chair that. Next slide. It's been a pretty productive period in terms of document production. Probably the biggest news here is probably the L4S suite of RFCs were finally published, and IPPM continued its usual productivity in terms of raw number of documents produced. It's probably the champ of the transport area. And a bunch of TCP and quick documents mostly made their way through. I also want to call your attention to something that did not come from our area. It's this thing here, draft Gantt numeric ID set considerations, which I believe has been approved by the IESG and is now on the RFC editor queue. It's what it says. It's kind of some of the security considerations in picking magic numbers for things. And it's something that is quite pertinent to a lot of transport applications. Next slide. This is our 3 times a year pitch for the TSV area review team. The role of this team is to take documents in IETF last call that have particular transport implications and do a review. That review obviously informs the authors and the community, but it also helps ADs in there. It's an added check beyond the transport ADs on making sure that the documents are not doing bad things from a transport perspective. We're always looking for more reviewers. Thank you to those of you who are currently serving on the team. And that little number there in parentheses is how many they've done since IETF115. So as I think you can see here, is not an incredibly onerous workload. So if this is something you're interested in doing, please contact Magnus or Wes Eddy, who run the team, and they can get you started. And it's great prep for understanding what else is happening in the IETF and maybe taking a leadership role in the IETF someday. Next slide. Or is that the last slide?
I think that was the last slide. Yes.
Okay. Well, in that case, we'll move right on to open mic. If there's anything that anyone would like to share for the good of the community or any way you would like to yell at us, now is the time.
So no question. Okay, so my connection was restarted. I don't know, like if anybody remote can hear us.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, but it was strange that it restarted my screen at least.
Mr. Trammell.
Good morning, Mr. Duke. It looks like you're in an even worse time zone than I am. Ouch. Yeah, so just from the chat, basically we would, those of us in the TSV area who are active in the chat would encourage you to try and charter the congestion control working group as COCO.
Ooh.
I mean,
Well, that's
we're
quite
gonna test
clever.
to see if the IESG is like really boring about names and wants to name a working group after an email header. But I would go for COCO.
So I can see the chair. One of the chair is here. So they have decided to CCWG, but
Reese Enghart. Eric and I chose CCWG mostly because there's a good parallel to ICCRG, right? It's very easy to contrast the two. And we also thought we were done being cute. I mean, it's kind of a general sentiment. I mean,
If they tell you don't be cute, then this is the opposite of cute, which is good. But can you at least get cc@ietf.org just to maximize the email confusion?
no, we would like to reduce confusion.
All good. Thanks a lot.
So Brian, that's noted. I'll see. Okay.
I actually really like the name Coco, but I'm getting out of the,
I do, Martin.
I'm getting out of the business of naming these things. All right. If there are no other open mic comments, I think we can just move along and get you guys out of here early. And I'll go ahead and invite Marcus Eiler, who's been chairing IPM for about a year now. He's going to tell us what's going on. Take it away, Marcus.
Okay, so Martin, I think stop sharing and then I'll share again.
All right. Yeah, you can hear me. Perfect.
Share.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here to talk about IPPM and what's going on there. So, and yeah, go to the next slide, please. So I'm Marcus Ilar, and I'm co-chairing IPPM with Tommy Pauly, who is right now over in HTTP and chairing that session. Next slide, please. So we can start with some historical data. Like Martin said, I've been doing this for 1 year, but IPPM has been going on for quite some years. So I was starting to look at when we published our first RFC, and it was 1998. It was an RFC about a framework for defining metrics. It's quite an interesting document in itself. So that's 1998. And over these years, we have published 62 RFCs. The most recent one was in December 2022. That's RFC 9342 about alternate marking. And currently in the working group, we have 15 active documents. And as you see over the years, it's been kind of a it's been quite productive all over the years. It looks like it picked up a little bit more recently, but it's been churning along for quite some time, this working group. So next slide, please. So yeah, IP performance measurement. What is it then? So we'll go some background on what this group does and what it is. So next slide. So there are like 3 core things we're focusing on in IPPM. It's metrics. So that's like what kind of stuff do we want to measure? What do we want to understand about our networks? And then we're looking at methods, like what do we do to obtain these metrics, pretty much. And then finally, we also have then the protocols, like what are the actual interactions we need to do? What are the bits on the wire and all of that? So these are the 3 core things that we're doing. Next slide, please. So we start looking at what we mean with metrics. So here's a quote from an RFC that tries to define what we mean with metrics. So we try to standardize metrics that can be applied to the quality, performance, and reliability of internet data, delivered services, and applications running over transport layer protocols, for instance, TCP or UDP. So that's really the scope of things. And there's a lot of things you can measure, and we're trying to sort of define what these metrics mean and give them well-defined names so that we can use them and reason about them. So things like one-way delay, round-trip delay, packet delay variation, people like to call it jitter, we call it packet delay variation, connectivity, one-way packet loss, etc., etc. There's a lot of things. We try to have clear-cut definitions of these things so that we can reason about them and design protocols to actually measure them. So this is a really core fundamental part of what we do in IPPM. Next slide, please. So, but of course, you need some methods to obtain these metrics. So there are various types of methods that are being defined in IPPM, and we have like three broad categories of methods for obtaining these different performance metrics. So we have what we call active methods, and that's when you really inject traffic into the network using some protocol, and you measure what happens with that traffic that you are injecting. And then we have passive measurements, and that's when you observe packets that are not injected by you as an observer. You're more just looking at stuff flying over the wire and deriving your metrics from that. And of course we have hybrid methods that are combining these two ways. So you might have some actor that's generating adding some fields to the traffic, and you have some measurement points that don't have to be directly related to or actively injecting this traffic, but you might be tagging and marking packets on the path. And we usually call these then hybrid methods. And there are a bunch of methods that have been defined. So we have things like the alternate marking method, which is where you set a single bit in an IP header and then flip this bit in various ways to be able to measure things like packet loss. We have things called in situ O&M, where you tag on telemetry data onto packets. We have IP capacity methods, etc., etc. Lots of methods being defined in various ways, and we'll go look at a few of these and what's going on with them. So we can go to the next slide. Another important thing that IPPM has been doing, like just going through the history here, so is that we've been working on the protocols then. And for active measurement, there's a protocol suite that has been very important, that has been defined by IPPM, and this OWAMP, TWAMP, and STAMP protocol. So it's OWAMP is this one-way active measurement protocol. So you're using this to measure sort of one-way properties of your network. It's an active protocol, so you're injecting traffic into the network between clients and servers. And then we have two-way active measurement protocol that does the same, but you're actually kind of reflecting the test data. So you can measure kind of two-way properties of the traffic. So if you remember, we had these different metrics referring to one-way stuff and two-way stuff. And then there's a simplified architecture around this TWAMP, we call it STAMP, so simple two-way active measurement protocol. So this is really the core fundamentals of what IPPM has been doing. But now we can move on to kind of where we are right now. So current status. Next slide, please. So at the moment, we have 11 working group documents. So if you remember, I said we had 15 active documents. So 11 of these are currently working group documents, and 4 of these are documents that have been submitted to the ISG, and they are in various stages of the process there. Next slide, please. So we have active work going on new metrics, new methods, and new protocols. So kind of keeping into the charter there. But of course, there's also quite a lot of work on like maintenance of these protocols that we have been defining, and also extensions to them to like make them more up to date for various reasons. Yeah. Next slide. So what we can say right now, looking at what's going on in IPPM right now, I would say that we have kind of 2 broad scopes of work that is going on, which is somewhat intersecting, but also somewhat kind of not. So we have a lot of work going on about like being able to measure stuff as an operator. So like measuring things within your domain. So we usually call it a limited domain, where you're typically are an operator and you're in control of your infrastructure. So there's a lot of work in that space. But we also have a lot of work on sort of methods and protocols that are more designed for being able to kind of measure any network path between two hosts or endpoints. So yeah, test protocols that you can spin up as a client somewhere and test towards any arbitrary server, and then measure your results. So next slide. So some examples of these categories of work that we have right now is we have this alternate marking method that was just recently published as a standards track RFC, which is about tagging packets with single bits to be able to do sort of passive monitoring of these packets. Typically, this is something you would do within some network domain. We have this thing called IOAM, which we'll be talking a bit more about, which is also really about doing measurements within a specific domain, tagging your packets, adding data to them, telemetry data of various forms. We're defining new metrics, which are typically very much targeted to operators. And like this, we have something called precision availability metrics, which is about like observing adherence to specific like service layer objectives, and how much do we adhere to these objectives and things like that. So that's very typically focused on kind of operator domains, limited domains and such. In the other space, we have various work. We have some extensions to these O and TWAMP protocols. We have work on what we call IP capacity measurements. So it's like some protocols on how you actively determine the IP capacity of some network. You can also use that for deriving other metrics. And we have some interesting work on which is called responsiveness under working conditions, which is really not just measuring your network, but really measuring from a user perspective. So it's including a kind of entire web protocol stack. So TCP, HTTP2, TLS, all of that is part of the measurements, and you're deriving interesting metrics using a kind of more user-centric setup. And I will be talking a bit about these. So next slide, please. So we'll start talking a little bit about this in situ this IOAM. So it's short for in situ operation, administration, and maintenance. So this is really on this left-hand side. We're looking at obtaining telemetry data specifically as an operator or an operator of some kind of limited domain. So this is a set of documents that specifies then kind of performance monitoring and tracing in what we call limited domains. And there is some formal definition of limited domains, but generally it would be kind of a domain where some operator or some entity is in full control of all the nodes in that path. So what IOM does is that it records O&M information within packets when the packets traverses a specific network domain. So all of these transit nodes would look for IOM headers, and then they would read that, and then they would calculate some data, and then either append that data into these packets and forward them along this path, or it could just store the data and then export them using other metrics, other methods as well. But it's really about having this in-band O&M packets that you either trigger you to measure stuff, trigger you to export stuff, or yeah, etc. And you would have a set of nodes in this type of architecture. So you would have what we call an IOM encapsulating node that adds these IOM headers to packets, and then you have a bunch of transit nodes that reads these packets, looks for, okay, what headers are here? Does that mean that I need to do something? Maybe I need to measure something, and maybe I need to add something to this packet before forwarding, etc., etc. And then finally, at the end of this domain, we have a decapsulating node that would remove the IOM headers from these packets and then keep forwarding them. And like I said, this IOM data can be added directly to packets or exported as separate O&M packets. So there are multiple options for handling the tracing, pretty much, and the telemetry export. And it's important because this is designed to be completely independent from underlying encapsulating protocols. So you can implement O&M on various layers, and you can even have multiple layers of IOM stacked on top of each other, depending on how your protocol suite looks like. So yeah, short overview of this. Next slide, please. So a little bit of the status of this IOM work. It's been quite active work in the IPPM working group, and currently we have 3 published RFCs around this, specifying the data fields. So what are the kind of data that we're interested in these transit nodes and such. And then we have various ways of looking at exporting of data. We have some active documents. A few of these are submitted to ISG and are in various stages of completion. We have an informational document called IOM deployment, which talks a little bit about these various deployment scenarios you can have for setting up an IOM work. We have IOM conf state, which is a method for kind of discovering different IOM capabilities within your domain. We have IOM IPv6 options, so that's one realization of IOM. Some active working group document as well. We have some Yang models, and we have some data integrity work, so that you can kind of protect your IOM options. Yeah, next slide, please. So moving on to something completely different. The working group, like I said, we had these two different broad scopes, sort of. So one scope is really focusing on network telemetry as an operator, and this is sort of far on the other end, which is this work, which is called responsiveness under working conditions. So this is a measurement method and metric targeting end users. With the main goal would be to kind of highlight how much your responsiveness, perceived responsiveness as a user, can be degraded due to buffer bloat. So the idea is really to kind of load up the network path as much as possible, using standard protocols that a user would normally use for a big part of its normal interactions with the internet. So it would be using TCP, TLS, HTTP2. And you generate enough traffic to achieve what is described as working conditions. And this is done by kind of gradually adding more and more load generating TCP connections, so that kind of not just one single TCP connection, because you will likely be receive window limited, and you might not actually reach this point where you really kind of saturate a bottleneck buffer and such. So you keep adding load to the network until you decide that you have reached what's called working conditions. And when you reach these working conditions, you start measuring something called responsiveness. And this responsiveness is a metric defined in this document. It's sort of defined in terms of round trips per minute. And you measure this by sending kind of probe requests. So you keep sending HTTP GET requests while you're in this state of having loaded the network. And then they're sending 2 types of probes. Some probes are sent on the load generating connections themselves, and some probes are sent on separate connections. And then all of this is combined, apply some statistics, and you calculate responsiveness. And yeah, the idea with this one is really to present something that is meaningful to an end user. So if the IOM stuff that we were looking at, that was really data targeted to operators. This is more for an end user, and they serve quite different purposes. But anyway, this is an active working group document right now. It's actively being worked on. It's progressing nicely through the working group, I would say. So yeah, next slide, please. And then we have a kind of similar active method and protocol as well, looking at similar stuff, but from a slightly different angle. So this is called IP capacity measurement. So this is derived from some work that was done on defining an IP capacity metric and a method. And now this work being done on a protocol to measure this. So this, instead of like, in this responsiveness work, we were using a user-centric protocol stack. So we have TCP, HTTP2, TLS, all of these things, talking to real HTTP servers. This one is more focused on just measuring purely the network component of your performance. So it's using UDP for this. So it's using UDP both for load generation and control messages. So load is generated in one direction between a client and a server, and you have another endpoint that the other endpoint then sends So one endpoint sends load PDUs, and the other one sends frequent status messages. So here again, similar to the previous method, is that you load up your network until you realize that it's fully saturated, and then you can report things like what is the current IP capacity. But this also enables metrics similar to the responsiveness that was defined in the previous method. So you can use this for kind of defining or measuring things like working latency and such, but using two very different ways of obtaining this. So this is also some interesting work that goes on. Next slide. And finally, we are, of course, doing quite a lot of protocol maintenance and extensions to previously standardized protocols. So we have a lot of, small extensions to these OWAMP, TWAMP, STAMP, etc. So we're making sure that it works over, like, for instance, link aggregation groups and things like this, so you can measure really like different components of your path. Extensions to make STAMP work with segment routing, Yang modeling, and then there's some work going on defining version 2 of PDM, which is some IPv6 destination options for measurement. And this work is really going about protecting these options, so encrypting them pretty much, so making them more secure to use. So this is some of the main work we're doing. And finally, we can go to the next slide. So what's next? As you see, we have quite a lot of active work in the working group, and there is quite a lot of work related to the working group that might end up in it. So currently we have 16 related internet drafts and lots of potential work. There's a lot of interest in sort of both of these areas that I talked about, both this kind of endpoint user-centric type of measurements, but also this kind of operator domain telemetry work. So this is part of our agenda we had yesterday. And so you see, there's always a lot of interest in bringing new work to this group. So basically, we never have time to give longer talks for all the work that people want to bring in. So we always, like every IPPM session we've had now for the last 3 or 4 IETFs, we always do this lightning talk way, where we allow people to bring one slide and talk about their work, and then hopefully generate some interest. And it's always pretty full. So yeah, you can see here that quite a lot of work that people want to bring into the IPPM group. And I think that was my final slide. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments or anything you might have. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. I mean, this was a really good overview, at least for me. I've been looking into a lot of documents, and this is a quite good information. So, Lars.
See if I can take off my mask without getting my glasses broken. Lars, I got another question, because I remember when we decided to put the IOAM-based work in IPPM, the thought process was that they would use the same metrics that were done for OWAMP and 2WAMP way back when, and maybe that are still being maintained, right?
Yeah.
Is that happening?
I believe so. I believe that I think we should have some IOM expert to answer that completely, because a lot of this has been worked. But part of these data fields and these metrics are being reused, but I think there are other ones as well, because you have things like you're adding like your hop counts and all kinds of things, and so there is some reuse, but there are also new metrics, I would say.
The reason I'm asking is, so we in the ISG recently, we sort of try to see if, because we have some areas that are quite a bit larger than other areas, and we're trying to sort of figure out what to do, whether some areas need more IDs or we need to like rebalance the working groups between the, and IPPM is one where part of it looks like it might be more int, like that part, specifically the IOM part, right? But the connector, or the original reason for putting it here, was the metrics and the measurement expertise, right?
Yes.
Those two things. And if sort of that connection is very strong, right, that would argue against moving anything here. If that connection didn't really happen, we might have a discussion sort of further down the road whether sort of some split or merge or whatever have you makes sense, right? That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I understand, and I think that's a very valid question. I think that it's definitely happening. I think it could happen more. I think we have a potential for a lot of good cross interaction here between these different communities, because we have some commonality in the metrics and in the interest in measurement. But yeah, we're struggling a little bit with actually getting like cross reviews across these different areas of IPPM, or what we would call it. So yeah, it's definitely food for thought how we improve that.
Thanks.
Gore.
Hi, it was super good to see that overview. I've got a kind of question that's to the working group chair, that comes from a working group chair. Some people in the IETF are interested in implementing our stuff, making tools available. This seems like a super relevant question for IPPM.
Yeah.
Is there a place where you keep your tools visible and other people's implementations of this so that people can see it? Is that something you've thought about in the group or not? It's not something that I've put a lot of thought to until this year, but have you thought about it?
I think that's an excellent question. I think we don't have like a common space for it for the working group. This is something for us to consider. Again, we're coming back a little bit to this kind of different areas of things we have. We have the IOAM stuff, which is really about operator telemetry and all that stuff. And then we have these more active measurement protocols. And I think some of the work they have their own. They're handling this on their own. Like for instance, we have this responsiveness thing. They're quite active. They have GitHub repositories and wikis and community pages and such. But I think it's something for us to consider because like one thing we've been discussing is that we have this. Like I was saying, we have this IP capacity measurement and we have this responsiveness work that are looking at very similar problems, but from different angles. And maybe it would make sense to document where we can find tools for both of these. And yeah, it's definitely something for us to consider. It's not something we have right now. No.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the answer. I wonder if the IP capacity measurement might actually help us in TSVWG and other groups who are actually trying to do transport protocols and trying to know capacity. If we had code from there, that might be an interesting benchmark or a bit of our protocol even in future. So super interested to hear those talks. Thank you.
Thanks.
So the queue looks empty. Any last thoughts or comments? Seems like no, but then that was our agenda for this meeting. Unless you have something more to say.
Can't have to end the meeting early. That would be no. So the other thing that popped into my head, right, that IPVM was always one of the groups that had a pretty strong link to work in ITU. Is that still a thing?
There's still quite a.
In other words, I haven't paid attention. Please.
Yeah. No. There's definitely a link there, and we also see a link to recently now to BBF as well, and they're defining this quality of experience metric. So those links are there for sure. Yeah. Again, it depends a bit on what work we have because it's very disparate, but definitely, yeah.
Okay, again, last call for last thoughts or comments or questions to Marcus. Otherwise, we can give some sleeping time back to Martin, so we can go to bed early. Sounds good, Martin?
Enjoy first dibs on the cookies.
We have to wait for that one until 3:30, right? Oh, yeah. No, we have passed that time. Okay, but that was all for us for this session. Thanks for joining, and see you in 117. Bye. Yeah. When you said Marcus, it was like Mark said.